Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Larissa Lutsevich. I'm the head of Ukraine Forum and research fellow at Russia-Eurasia program in Chatham House. See, this is what it takes working from home. You forget your titles. But welcome to our conversation on Germany's Russia policy in the post-Merkel era. I'm really pleased to say that we have fascinating speakers today. And this event is held on the record. We will be recording, and we have guests today present in the house, which is fantastic. Welcome back. But also we have over 100 participants joining us online on our platform. So this is one of those hybrid events where we will be engaging audiences from Chatham House and from the digital world. We will be also releasing a video recording of the conversation today, so you will be able to share it with your networks widely. So the conversation will first invite speakers, and then we will also take questions from the floor and from the Zoom platform in a Q&A chat of the Zoom platform. So I'm really pleased that we have John Luff, our associate fellow, who is presenting today what was quite a substantial research in his new book called Germany's Russia Problem. And John will talk a little bit about the origins of the book and what it means for the future policy making. And John is somebody who knows really well both Russia and Germany. He spent 6 years in NATO and was the first alliance representative based in Moscow in 1995-1998. He's also gained direct experience what it takes to do business in Russia in gas and oil industry with 10K BP, where he was a manager of company's international affairs. Currently, in addition to working with Chatham House, John is consultant at Highgate Advisory. So welcome, John. And we're really pleased to have our first continental guest speaker in the post-COVID world, Ralf Fuchs, who is the managing director at the Center for Liberal Modernity in Berlin. Ralf has an extensive experience over 20 years working as the president of Heinrich Böll Stiftung. It's a political foundation of the Green Party in Germany. And he is a thinker, philosopher, and looking a lot into what it takes to protect liberal democracy and find a new green future for the planet. He's also an author of the book Defending Democracy, that he will, I'm sure, bring some of the insights into our conversation today. So without further ado, I would like to invite John to present us his analysis of Germany, because I think it's an interesting historical overview with quite strong policy implications for today, where this deep analysis talks about a lot of emotions, I would say, that drive Germany's policy towards Russia, to tell a little bit about the origins of the book and what it means for the future. John, over to you.
Thank you, Arisia, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be able to talk about the book. The origins, they go back a long way. I had the good fortune to study German and Russian literature at university. And I had one of those light bulb moments in my final year. They probably come to students in their final year. But mine was being set a really horrible essay on a Dostoevsky novel called Biesi, The Devils. And it was, the title was something to do with it, and it sticks in my mind, the psychopathology of Stavrogin, the main character. And like most students, I felt, well, I'm going to have to find some literature that helps me to understand this. And I went to the university library, and I really couldn't find very much around until I looked in German. And I found some really insightful material. I wrote, I think, a reasonably good essay. And my supervisor, said to me, "Where did you get this from? Because this is really interesting." And I said, "It comes from German." And she said to me, "You've discovered something really important, and you need to learn more about this." And I feel as though over the last 35 years, I've been trying to do that, because I had this amazing experience in the 1990s as a NATO official of being based at the German embassy in Moscow. and just seeing how the Germans went about managing their relations with Russia. And what really impressed me was the breadth of contacts that Germany was able to build in all fields, whether it was culture, sport, right through to the military, education. Just amazing. The biggest embassy in the world. It really surpassed the efforts of most other European countries. So why do I mention this as background? It's because I saw in those days that there was this tremendous understanding of Russia, knowledge of its history, of its knowledge of indeed what was going on in Russia. German diplomats extremely well informed. So I had to ask myself in recent years, how come with all this knowledge, all this insight, fantastic scholarship as well, historically on Russia, did Germany end up misreading what was going on in Russia? Why did it remain in denial about these really increasingly obvious changes that were occurring in Russia? Why did it persist with much the same policies? In other words, the primacy of these people-to-people contacts, the priority of economic relations, the belief that if you trade more, then you're going to stabilize relations. And indeed, there was a belief in Germany you would simply promote rule of law. This wasn't limited in Russia. It wasn't just limited to Germany. So there was this I think, notion in Germany that you needed to embrace Russia, you needed to feel that Russia was close, you mustn't push it into a corner. So how did Germany continue effectively supporting this system in Russia by not really criticizing it, wanting to trade more with it, but seemingly being in denial about what was happening, right up to 2014 when events kicked off in Ukraine? Germany was still talking about a modernization partnership with Russia, when really the only institutions at this stage that were being modernized were the security services and the armed forces. Russia was, I would argue, on something of a demodernization path, indeed a de-Europeanization path, if I can use that term. So those, I think, are the sort of origins of the book and why I felt it was a good time to write it. And I was extraordinarily lucky, first of all, to have more time to write it during the COVID lockdown, and secondly, for it to coincide with the end of the Merkel era.
Yes, thanks, John. I think you mentioned the importance of these emotional connections and kind of reflexes that were driving attitudes and policies towards Russia. And you explained that there's quite deep knowledge of Russian society and culture. So could you give us a quick answer? Why do you think these signals that were coming from internal developments inside Russia with the violation of human rights, crackdown on businesses, clear consolidation of kleptocracy inside Russia, why Germany kind of stayed on autopilot, if you want to say, instead of trying to adapt its policy?
I think the obvious answer to that is to accept that Russia was moving in this direction meant that you had to shift policy and deal with a much more difficult partner in this case. And that was, for a number of reasons, was very, very difficult to do. And I think you put your finger on it here, this question of emotion when dealing with Russia, that you've got this strange combination, I would say, of factors of fear of Russia historically, a sense of guilt for the crimes of the Nazis, the gratitude to Moscow for the fact that German unification happened when it did and so at such speed, and also a large measure of sentimentality, a liking for Russian culture. Angela Merkel particularly likes Russian culture, no question about that. She's a good Russian speaker. Then the economic logic for working with Russia, that Germany historically has had the technology and Russia has had the resources, and that there should be some sort of natural complementarity there. And then last but not least, the legacy of Ostpolitik from the late 1960s and 70s, which was widely seen in Germany as what's really presaged the end of the Cold War, and that you should pursue these policies of trying to relax tensions, build contacts, trade more, and somehow in the end, Russia will be the rational actor. It will behave much the way perhaps the Germans did when they saw the opportunity to transform their country. The trouble is Russia was not ready for this sort of transformation.
While we're answering some of the calls, I'll plug in a quick message that you can actually buy John's book, and it's available today with 40% discount. And we will post in Zoom information about the code, which is available on Manchester University Press, the website where you can buy the book. And the discount code is Problem1. It was suggested by Manchester University Press, so I guess it's problem one if you look at Europe today and the importance of Germany in shaping European policy towards Russia. I would say it's problem number one. But now I would like to bring in Ralph. I would imagine that being a German, reading this analysis of Germany on the couch, so to say, how do you feel this English gentleman? Did he get it right? If yes, why do you think so? If no, maybe John missed something in his analysis.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's a great honor. Maybe I should start with apologizing that I can't catch up with the speed John is talking. For me, English is a foreign language, so please have mercy if it's not so sophisticated. First, I would like to congratulate John. It's really a great book. So no hasty compilation of current day essays, but it provides really impressive scholarship, interdisciplinary and deep historical and political insights in German-Russia relations. So I'm quite impressed. And I would say, John, you are probably understanding this very complex German-Russian relationship better than most Germans do, for sure. And I found especially convincing these different layers of analysis of the long German-Russian relationship and the mix of also, like as you said, emotions playing in German-Russian politics. It's not just a kind of a rational fabric. Yeah, it's very deeply rooted in this kind of emotional relationships. This mix, as you already mentioned, of historical guilt because of especially the atrocities, the German atrocities in the Second World War, you know, the Leningrad hunger blockade, these millions of Soviet prisoners of war dying. And of course this is legitimate. There are good reasons for that, not to forget this history, and at the same time, and a special responsibility coming from this history, and at the same time, there's a strange bias in it, because these feelings of guilt and responsibility are especially attached to Russia, not to the other former Soviet nations, not to Ukraine, not to Belarus, not to Georgia, not to the Baltics. It's kind of a strange reduction of these Soviet German history to a Russian German story. And another layer is, of course, fear. Fear of another war with Russia. This is very deeply rooted in the German mindset. So let's avoid any escalation of conflict with Russia. This is one of the major guidelines very common across the German part. We have to avoid any escalation, and so we will not be engaged in any potential military conflict with Russia. We will not even deliver weapons to Ukraine. Yeah? So another layer is this mythical soul familiarity between Germany and Russia. You know, it's especially a cultural thing. Goethe and Tolstoy and Nietzsche and Dostoevsky and Beethoven and Tchaikovsky and Bolshoi and Balalaika and this kind of, I would say, a mix of romanticism and brutality, which always was this German-Russian. You know, it was this kind of romantic proximity and brutality in their mutual relations. And then, of course, more politically, there is a long-term idea of this special relationship between Germany and Russia in political terms, that peace and stability in Europe is depending from good relations between Germany and Russia. Yeah, this should be the core of an European peace and stability. In order, we have to have these kind of good relationships, and economically, we already had been talking about this. You also have a long-term idea in the German business elites of a special partnership with Russia. Russia is providing the raw materials for the German industry, and Germany is providing technology and industrial equipment and then industrial goods for Russia. This goes back to the early 20th century, these kind of ideas. And if you look into Nord Stream 2, this is a continuation of this kind of partnership. And you have it still in the current debates among German elites, especially business elites. Why not creating this kind of common economic space or integrated economic space from Lisbon to Vladivostok? A huge market of 800 million and more people, and a potential third bloc vis-à-vis the United States and China. And the Russians are playing very skillfully with this kind of Eurasian ideas. And if it comes to our current policy, I would agree with John that 2014, the Russian intervention in Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, and the German response was to a certain point, I would not say a fundamental paradigm shift, but a new element in German-Russian policies, because Chancellor Merkel then became the leading advocate of European sanctions against Russia. This was really a new move. But I would say it was not really a strategic shift, but a kind of dual strategy towards Russia, limited conflict, and we want to limit the area of conflict to allow business as usual in other areas, business as usual politically and economically. And again, Nord Stream 2 is a telling example, because the agreements on Nord Stream 2 had been signed in 2015, 1 year after the Ukraine intervention. And there was a very interesting interview the long-term foreign policy advisor to Chancellor Merkel, Mr. Heusgen, gave in the Spiegel, the major weekly in Germany. And he said Chancellor Merkel was always aware what Russia can tolerate. And so de facto, if you think this to the end and the consequences, German politics is giving Russia a kind of veto power, defining the limits of our foreign policy. And this is why, and he gave these examples, this is why Chancellor Merkel opposed NATO membership action plan for Ukraine and Georgia. This is why we are refusing supporting Ukraine with the weapons, strengthening their capacity of self-defense and deterrence. And this is why we are continuing this kind of strategic energy cooperation with Russia. Of course, there is, I would say, a rational element with it. We cannot just deny that we should not try to push Russia into the corner. Yeah, so I don't think it would be a wise strategy to this kind of boycott and isolation and let's burning down the bridges to Russia. But I would say we have to find a different kind of equilibrium, different kind of balance between conflict and limited cooperation.
Thank you very much. I think you raised a lot of issues, and especially, the perpetuation of these beliefs throughout generations about sense of obligation to Russia, and maybe we can come back to this in discussion, how much you see this carries on to a younger generation inside Germany, or is there a certain reassessment of that? And also, of course, I would say that one of the triggers that really changed Western policy especially German policy on Russia and sanctions was not just annexation of Crimea, but MH17 that was it was not so, it was taking place over the territory of Ukraine, but it was, I think, a very strong symbol of how this conflict has an international dimension, that it's not some regional conflict in the backyard of Russia,
and we
in
are
a way.
Silent on that.
Yeah.
The German government is very silent on that.
Exactly.
Also, the series of cyber attacks against the German Bundestag, against the heart of our democracy, the killings of Russian oppositions 1 mile from Merkel's Chancellor. We are very cautious, very hesitant because of this. We don't want to get into conflict.
So while you, ladies and gentlemen, here thinking about the questions, I just want to, and I see a couple coming in already in the Zoom chats, but please, while we're having a conversation, get ready to engage with our speakers. Maybe I would like to ask you to briefly answer each the question about how if we're looking towards the future coalition after post-Merkel German policy towards Russia, how much do you suspect this will carry on? And perhaps, John, in your book, you're providing some more viable alternatives to the current approach. Maybe you want to highlight those. So are you expecting things will carry on with the new coalition as it was before, or you think there is a chance for more effective policy towards Russia to make the problem smaller?
Well, my view is that there will be, in general terms, just a continuation of the current policies. There might be some slight hardening if the Greens are part of the next government. Then I would expect some of their concerns, particularly about human rights, for example, to be visible. Also, climate change, and there could be some possibly more informed discussion about the impact of Nord Stream. But I think Nord Stream 2 is still going to go ahead eventually, but it might still be delayed. In terms of the future goals, I think it's becoming more visible that the next sort of milestone in Russia is 2024. And what does President Putin continue in office? Is he going to be re-elected? If not, who would replace him? What sort of systemic change might occur if he were to be replaced? But what I try to draw attention to in the book is that there is a lack of what one can only really describe as strategic thinking in Germany about the Russia challenge. But it seems to me that this country is not going to remain in the current groove indefinitely. The pattern of Russian history tells us that Russia goes through these phases. It's its key vulnerabilities at the moment are the overdependence on relations with China. And secondly, and this, of course, will appeal to Ralph and those associated with the Greens, the urgent need to reorientate its foreign trade away from hydrocarbons. Mm-hmm. This model is simply not sustainable. And I've said to a number of European diplomats, including Germans in the past, that if you want to exert a form of pressure on Russia, you should accelerate the decarbonization of transportation, because this will force the Russian system to change. And I can tell you, there were some diplomats actually threw up their arms in horror who said to me, do you want to bring the Russian economy to its knees? I said, absolutely not. But if Russia doesn't experience this pressure, it's not going to change in time. And at the moment, you can see in terms of decarbonization, I mean, the country's still largely in denial about the urgency of this task.
So, Ralph, John mentioned the Green Party as a possible kingmaker in the opposition, if in the coalition. And if that is the case, how do you think that will influence foreign policy on Russia? What difference can it make?
I think it's for sure that the Greens will play quite a significant role in the next government. It's not so clear which kind of coalition it will finally be, but I think it could be an interesting element if the Liberals and the Greens come closer together also in foreign policy issues. They are both much more outspoken and critical towards China and Russia than previously the Grand Coalition has been. I think they have a higher sensitivity for human rights and democracy issues, also as not the only but a relevant criteria in international relations. They both have a critical look at Nord Stream 2. Maybe it's too late, but we'll see if there will be room for maneuver, maybe even for a moratorium. I'm not so optimistic, but this will be a critical issue in coalition negotiations. But, and here I would agree with John when he said he's expecting more continuity. I think still German political parties, all of them in the democratic center, are shying away from categories like containment and deterrence. Now, if you mention these like buzzwords, containment and deterrence as an element for our Russian policy, it's people are becoming nervous, and so the interesting thing will be if we will be really ready to strengthen the eastern flank of NATO, then increase our engagement in security for the Baltics, for Poland. So this, I would say, the hardware aspect of foreign and security policy, this is quite, this is still a very delicious thing.
And there's actually a question related to that from Quentin Pila, my colleague at Chatham House, who says, if Robert Habeck is Vice Chancellor of the German government, will he not push his view that Ukraine should be provided with defensive weapons?
I found this quite a bold move, because we both know that this is not very popular even in the Green Party, and interestingly, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats immediately started attacking him on that. So he had to row back. I don't think this will be a priority on the negotiation list of the Greens, but I think Ukraine probably will become a higher meaning for or a higher importance for than our Eastern Partnership policy.
Okay, very, very interesting. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you like to start some questions from the floor? Yes, please. Yeah. microphone. Could you please introduce yourself and ask the question? Yeah. You can please take off your mask.
Oh, exciting. Hello, I'm Jane Kinnenmont with the European Leadership Network, and thanks very much for mentioning Nord Stream 2. I'd be very interested to hear how the current spike in energy prices across Europe is playing into that debate. Does it make people in Germany think the project needs to be activated quickly, or does it highlight the risks and vulnerabilities that come from depending more on Russia for gas? Thank you.
Maybe, John, you take this one then.
Yeah, my impression so far, and partly because of, no doubt, this sort of distraction of election politics over the last few weeks, I'm not sure this issue has been sort of properly processed yet in the debate. What I've tended to see in German media, particularly, more sort of factual reporting about, the levels of gas in storage, price rises, etc. Not really the question of why is this happening, what is Russia's role in this. My personal view is that the Russians are being opportunistic. I don't believe they expected to see quite this sort of crisis emerging in Europe. They didn't expect to see liquefied natural gas being exported in these volumes to the Asian markets and leaving Europe short. So it gives them an opportunity, and it's not surprising that they're trying to use it. And you get statements then from the Kremlin saying, if only Nord Stream 2 were operational, then the situation in Europe would be much better. I mean, it's hardly surprising that they're saying that. Because their thinking is quite joined up, and they're able to move swiftly. But I'd be interested in Ralph's view.
Yeah, I think there is a growing awareness that this kind of dependency from Russia has its flip side, and I'm not deep enough in the materia to have a final opinion how far Russia is using now this shortage in gas supply as leverage to enforce Nord Stream 2 becoming certificated and going into operation. Unfortunately, and this is a critical remark also to green politics, the phase out of nuclear energy, the final nuclear power plant in Germany, now we have still 6 running, will take place next year, will increase at least our short-term dependency from Russian gas. And there will be a debate if we really should invest billions of euro in liquid natural gas terminals and diversify then our gas portfolio, when at the same time our climate goal is to reduce gas consumption over the next 10 years at least by 20%. So it does not make sense to invest more in gas infrastructure when at the same time you want to reduce it. But energy policy will become a very critical issue over the next years.
And how do proponents of Nord Stream in Germany explain that controversy that you've just described? What are their arguments in favor of gas infrastructure?
They say, oh no, this is not a policy of Gazprom. No, we have a global shortage. In gas, we have globally rocketing gas prices, and this is another argument that we have to have this close relationship with Russia to ensure our resource needs.
Yeah, if I can add something, is people always say that Russia over decades has been a reliable supplier of gas to Germany.
Even the Soviet Union.
And they ignore the crisis of 2009?
Yeah.
They ignore the fact that energy has been used as a weapon against not just Ukraine, but the Baltic states and others. And there is this, just this sort of almost religious belief that Russia will always behave this way because Russia needs the market, it needs the European market, and Germany needs the gas. So there is a sort of marriage of convenience.
Yeah, this kind of argument that you describe in your book, where economic codependence brings modernization to Russia, also through linkages in the global economy, and hopefully more liberalism and democracy inside Russia.
But this is very interesting. The German Industry Association just published a new strategy paper on human rights, democracy, and their business relations. And then here, for the first time, they questioned this old equation, this old formula that trade and then investments in Russia and other authoritarian lands would lead to their liberalization, would stimulate a kind of democratic modernization. They themselves now put a question mark on it, though no, we cannot rely on it. But of course, still they are arguing for this kind of mutual dependency as a tool to limit conflict.
I will bring a bit more questions from our online platform, and then I will come back to you, sir. Of course, I must bring in Marie-Louise back. She asked the first question here. Ralph and Marie-Louise are husband and wife, and they're also working together. This is a very strong power couple in Germany. And Marie says, if you say that John Love knows the Germans better than they do, as you confirmed, how well do you think Kremlin knows German psychology? Because I guess it takes two to tango. It takes two for this chemistry to work between Russia and Germany. So maybe we'll start with John on that, because you also know Russia quite well. How well do you think Russians understand German psyche and abuse it, if I may say?
Well, I think it's fair to say that there's excellent knowledge of Germany in Russia, and of the subtleties of Germany, the fact that you have a German-speaking president who spent some of his formative years in Germany and likes Germany and maintains a very strong interest in Germany, does make this relationship in some ways rather special. There are some German commentators who've pointed out that Germany is psychologically vulnerable to forms of Russian influence, and that Russia is seeking to exploit this. I mean, I'm one of those who believes that, in terms of, Ralph has correctly referred to these cyber attacks, for example, on Germany. There are various Russian sort of influence operations that have been underway for decades. But compared to some other European countries, I don't see Russia having to work so hard to influence opinion, because Germany is kind of softer material to work with in the first place. Yes, of course they have these things like RT and Sputnik and all their I don't know, their NGO links and various other relationships.
City twinnings a lot.
Yeah, they have all these things, and they're
Russia
very,
today plays a growing role.
Indeed. But it's still a sort of relatively easy environment. There's not much sort of resilience when it comes to, I think, sort of understanding what the Russian message is and what Russia is trying to do in terms of influencing German attitudes, particularly towards Ukraine. For example, I'm reliably told that in 2014, when the revolution started in Ukraine, that it was actually quite difficult to get the message to the top of the German Foreign Office that these were not fascists that had come to power in Ukraine. And I think that's quite revealing, because it tells you something about the information channels that are being used.
Yeah, I would say the Kremlin and the spin doctors in Russia, they are playing really skillfully with these German resentments and this special German mindset concerning Russia. With all the instruments of propaganda, of disinformation, but also influence networks, business communities. And I wonder, and I would be interested in your assessment, John, I would say until recently, the Russians saw Germany as a kind of swing state in Europe. Yeah, Germany was the country they had been focusing on to break up NATO and to create these kind of new alliances with Russia as a strategic partner. And I wonder, in the last 2 years or so, the Russian language towards Germany became much more aggressive, much more tough. And I wonder if they gave up.
Afraid.
Yeah. So if they are still interested in this kind of special relationship, I would think yes, but the tone, the language changed.
No, you are right, you're absolutely right. That's been very clear over the last certainly 18 months, and particularly after Alexei Navalny was brought to Berlin.
Yeah, Navalny was an important point.
You had from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Moscow these press releases written in Stalinist language. Yeah. And you have the impression that relations between Germany and Russia have not been at this level since the 1970s. And I think back, 15 years ago or so, and talking to some of my friends in the German Foreign Office who were saying to me, we have the best relations with Russia that we've had for 100 years. And you think back, Ralph, to that, amazing speech that Putin gave
2007
to the German Parliament, 2001.
In the German Parliament, 2007 was the Munich Security Conference.
Yeah, where he changed his tone.
Yeah.
But in 2001, if you want to look at the way the Russian system is able to read the other side's reactions, to find the right messages, to touch press the right buttons. Look at that speech. It's still widely quoted in Germany, and the camera goes around the room, and you can see these members of Parliament just sort of entranced by what Putin is saying. He's talking about German culture and Russian love for Germany and this greater sort of European constellation of which both countries are part.
Perhaps
and they are eating out of his hand. It's a really amazing spectacle.
Perhaps that's a good example of soft power at play in a good execution. Yeah. I'll go back to the audience here, and please here, introduce yourself.
Hello. Roger Golden, ex-diplomat, a long time ago. Picking up on Ralph's point about Russia's policy of trying to break up NATO, brings us to President Macron and his recent comments. So my question is, could both panelists just say something about the influence of the French on the formulation of German policy, clearly with relevance to the Minsk process and going forward with the new Chancellor when we have one? And as an appendix, I'd be very interested in your comments on the influence of British foreign policy on the formulation of German policy towards Russia. Is there any? Do they listen? What are the arguments that work? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And it connects well to the question from John Mason here, who says, to what extent will the effect of Brexit change German-Russia relationship? So the question is, what about other parties to that dance? Maybe Ralph.
Interesting questions. To start with the easier part, I think Brexit also in this aspect is a total disaster. The loss of the partnership with Great Britain, especially in foreign and security policy, but also, I would say, in economic policies, changed the equilibrium within the EU dramatically. And of course, now, I would say Germany, to a certain extent, is alone with France. Be it for good or for bad, but now this axis, Paris, Berlin, has become even more important. Up to now, there had been a kind of division of labor in terms of European foreign policy that I would say Macron and Paris in general, they agreed that Germany should take the lead vis-à-vis Central Eastern Europe, and they would lead in terms of the Mediterranean and the southern neighborhood of Europe. And I think for Germany this was okay. This was the kind of then cooperation. Also in the Minsk process, Germany was up to now the leading partner in this European duo with France. Maybe this will change. It depends if Macron and the French political elites really will go fully gaullistic, either in this kind of strategic, not only sovereignty, but independence of Europe, kind of equal distance between Washington and Moscow. I think still this is not the favorite idea in Germany, but I think this will be more and more a matter of political arguments, and it will become one of the major political decisions which have to be made in the next years. Yeah, how do we understand kind of European strategic autonomy? Do we see it as an alternative to the transatlantic alliance, as an alternative to NATO, or do we see it as a strong pillar within the architecture of the kind of alliance of democracies? And I think this debate has only started. And of course, sagen AUKUS, this, I will, not in substance, but that these US, Australian, British alliance was made as a coup. Yeah?
Perceived as a coup.
Yeah. This, of course, is extremely backfiring. It's, yeah.
And John, if you may also bring a bit of a dimension of the new SDP leader. If you can, of course, reflect on what are the possibilities in his perceptions and attitudes with Putin or some of these issues, if you're able to bring, because there's a question from Douglas Andrews on that, specifically on the SDP.
Yeah. Well, I'm not personally cited on Olaf Scholz's sort of view of Russia. I think there's a range of views now within the SDP that probably suggest there'll be some sort of readjustment, perhaps, of a policy position, partly because some of the older, maybe sort of Ostpolitik generation is not there in the party as it was 10 years ago. We've had quite an influx of younger MPs now from the SPD into Parliament. So I think the effect of events in Ukraine has been quite sobering on some of those more probably sort of open-minded people who are not just going to cling to the old idea that we must be nice to the Russians, help calm them down, not confront them as Ralph was suggesting, but people who realize actually that this is a long-term challenge we have. Russia is not permanently going to be in this state, and we have to nudge it back onto the road of reform. I think we can probably expect to see some of those sentiments at least present. On the other hand, having to think about at the same time the problem of Ukraine and how Ukraine is developing, the track it's taking, this very serious situation we have in Belarus, which I think is extremely underestimated at the moment, including in Germany. This could turn nastier very, very quickly. So the new German Chancellor is going to have a lot to deal with. And we are going to reflect on the fact that we did have somebody during the Angela Merkel era who had, firstly, a good understanding of her interlocutor because of her East German background. I mean, she joked the first time she met with Putin that she managed to hold his stare because she knew that he would stare at her to start that whole sort of intimidation dynamic. And she passed that test and was pleased with herself. Secondly, her spoken Russian believed to be pretty good, able to converse with Putin in Russian. At least he would speak Russian, she'd speak German. They'd understand each other. So that's a very different personal dynamic, and these dynamics among leaders are important. Also, in the case of Merkel, good knowledge of Ukraine and even of Donbass, as opposed to the geography of Donbass. So this is going to be very different.
Yeah.
And I think you also mentioned in your forward outlook in the book how Germany could play this kind of constructive role in deepening also France's understanding on Russia, because I think if in Germany it's quite romantic, in France I would say it's even more romantic than in Germany. So maybe bringing some of those sobering experiences, especially in terms of what Germany has achieved by pursuing the policy you've described in your book. And that's a big question, whether it had delivered the expected outcomes. I would like to bring in more audience here into a discussion.
My name is Janet Gunn. I'm a former Foreign Office analyst. And I wondered if there had been any evidence of interference from Russia in the recent elections in Germany, whether Russia stood back and hoped for sort of more or less continuity politics, whatever the result was, or whether they tried to undermine the Green Party, given their tougher stance towards Moscow, or support Die Linke and the AfD, as they have done quite conspicuously since at least 2014, if not before.
Good question.
Yeah, I think the intervention in the German electoral campaign via the official Russia media, the Russia Today, and its daughters via the unofficial internet channels was not so massive as we maybe then expected. At least not on this kind of partisan level. Of course, there was a much negative reporting about the Greens and her frontrunner, Annalena Baerbock. But the main area of, I would say, ensuing conflict and then increasing internal rifts in Germany, interestingly, is the Kovit crisis. Every day you find then on the homepage of Russia Today and its TV program then articles and reports on the risks of vaccination, and they this kind of disinformation, fueling mistrust in science, in the democratic institutions. In the moment, this is their main area of intervening in the German public opinion.
I'm sure you have some answers to that in that book, how to defend democracy from exactly the measures that Janet was asking about.
Yeah, not only in a defensive way. I think we have to strengthen our capacities to deal with crises, be it with climate change or with digitalization or with demographic change in Germany or with global migration. I think we must become a little bit, we have to become too complacent. Yeah, we must become more ambitious in reviving than our democracies and making them an attractive success model.
John, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think all I would add is that compared to the results of the Brexit referendum, where there were champagne corks popping in the Kremlin, I think this election in Germany has again showed that Germany has a really very stable system. The fact that the AfD vote hasn't increased massively, it decreased, yeah. And Die Linke has shrunk also quite significantly. Yeah. So we're back to, of course, a different form of coalition, but Germany's really quite skilled at dealing with coalition politics.
Yeah, we are far away from the degree of polarization we are seeing in many other Western countries.
Well, that's good news for your democracy. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Ricia. John, I've started to read... Sorry, forgive me, Andrew Foxall, Ministry of Defence. Ricia, thank you. John, I've started to read your book. It's excellent, but I haven't finished it yet. Ralph, I'm sure your book is equally as insightful. Thank you both for your comments. John, you've in a sense spoken a lot about what Germany gets wrong about Russia. Are there any areas where Germany gets Russia right? And then actually what lessons can we, for example, here in the UK or other countries draw from those instances? Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I'm just linking in some of our questions from the digital audience, and Mary Dojewski actually similarly asks, perhaps it's, the Germans are getting it right, and the UK are getting it wrong. What would you say to that?
Okay, well, let me say, first of all, what Germany deserves a lot of credit for is taking Russia seriously and devoting a lot of resources to dealing with Russia. The fact that it has the largest Goethe Institute, I believe, in the world in Moscow. It's the largest embassy. You find the quality of interpretation from Russian into German and the other way in Berlin is extraordinarily high. So there are serious resources there. So I think that is a big plus, and it's probably not replicated in any other European country on this scale. I think the proof of the pudding is that in 2014, Germany was taken by surprise by the annexation of Crimea in particular, was deeply shocked that Russia really could behave this way. And I would argue in the book, I say it openly, that in several respects, the German sort of acquiescence in certain aspects of Russian behavior had simply emboldened Russia. And that's why this outcome in Crimea occurred the way it did. And Russia was very well prepared for this and has been preparing for it since as early as 2008. So, unfortunately, there was a lot of wishful thinking in Berlin. The idea, for example, that Dmitry Medvedev was going to be Russia's future, because he was pressing the right buttons. He was talking about rule of law, digitalization, modernization, and he appeared to have a team of people behind him who shared these views. And if you had become uncomfortable with dealing with Putin personally, as I think Merkel had, it was a bit of a relief to talk to Medvedev. So I think that's another example of this maybe sort of policy of denial about what was really happening.
Ralph, would you like to add something? And maybe let me just bring in another layer, as I'm trying to do these kind of layering questions. Apologies if it's a bit too confusing, but there are a lot of interesting questions also in online. Richard Wright says, EU's policy towards Russia has never been unified, and member states' views have varied widely. Has Germany suffered at all from that lack of EU unity towards Russia? Because, of course, there's bilateral track, but also I think Germany is much more comfortable cooperating within the multilateral frameworks with Russia.
Yeah, this is, of course, the official German language. But if you're looking to German politics, especially Nord Stream 2 has been really a binational German-Russian project, we say, with some other European companies participating, but and I think it contributed to the divisions. In Europe, the political division, it saw mistrust in Germany, especially in Poland, in Ukraine, in the Baltics. So we don't always walk the talk. Germany as the front runner for coordinated and united European foreign and security policy. Of course, I think we need it, but we have to invest much more political capital in it than we did, and especially to recognize the different historical experiences, the different geopolitical situation, the different perceptions of the Central European countries, and to figure them into our own than political thinking, this would be an important improvement.
And I guess one of the more classical questions on the dealing with Russia comes from Graham Timmins, who says, do the panelists believe that the reset in EU-Russia relations is necessary? And can this be achieved without undermining the EU's identity as an exporter of liberal values and good governance?
I don't think any reset is possible at the moment. And I don't see it happening. The visit by the High Representative Borrell in February to Moscow was evidence of that. I don't think Moscow is interested in this right now. It will seek undoubtedly to pick off some European capitals, to have friendlier relations with them and undermine EU unity that way. And for now, they'll take a temperature check with the new German government and just work out what the art of the possible is. But what I find absolutely amazing about what the Russians have done over at least the last couple of years is that they had this, from their point of view, excellent relationship with Germany. And in a quite sort of unsentimental fashion, they seem to have just sort of discarded it for now. And it's really difficult to see how it's going to be rebuilt with the current team in office in the Kremlin.
So, Rolf, do you see German leaders after the elections, could they be mulling such the possibility of a reset with Russia?
Well, there's always, I would say, kind of temptation for this. I hope it could be then possible, but I think over the last, maybe since Ukraine and all the following then events, maybe slowly a more realistic perception of Russia is taking place, but still we are shying away from what I would say a crucial decision. Should we see Russia as a kind of a difficult partner, or should we see the current Russian regime? I would like to differentiate between the current regime and Russia as a society as an adversary. And we are shying away from recognizing the Kremlin as a political adversary to the democratic Europe because of the consequences that are so uncomfortable.
I think it's a long leap from strategic partner to strategic adversary, because you remember, and you point to this in the book, as you know, there were difficulties with the Ukraine association agreement with the EU. The offer was for Russia, it was way before Ukraine, and an offer of trade liberalization, visa liberalization, and that was strategic partnership that European Union wanted to create with Russia. And I think there was genuine will on the European side to make this work. Unfortunately, we know the things unraveled on that front.
The new area of hope is climate cooperation.
Climate cooperation.
And
okay.
Especially hydrogen partnership with Russia. This is the new...
That's official policy or wishful thinking?
Yeah, I would say both, yeah.
Okay, both.
So this will be the final tool to modernize the Russian economy and to bring the reformists into power and to, yeah.
But again, it's being pushed by German industry, and it's going back to this formula that's been in place for over 100 years, that Russia has the hydrogen resources and Germany will bring the technology. So here again, is this sort of excellent marriage of complementarity. Sorry, if I may, I wanted to go back to the very good question asked by both Andrew and Mary Dejevsky. What have the Germans done well? I think building these people-to-people contacts still remains extremely important. And Germany is way ahead in that respect, even if some of those contacts, partly because of COVID, of course, but some of them have cooled a little bit over recent years anyway, since Crimea. But I think Germany is very much guided by the reconciliation process that took place after World War II with some of its immediate neighbors, notably with France, where these people-to-people contacts played a really important role in finding a common language. So I think there's still great appetite for this in Germany at local level. Amazing exchange programs, whether it's fire brigades, football teams, you name it, orchestras. There have been lots and lots of things happening, and it's very important that they continue.
And I think here, because there are some questions related to, from David Manning, related to support to Navalny and Russian democratic opposition. Of course, we are speculating about the future coalition, but knowing the leaders in the future coalition, can we say what could be the policy towards more support of civil society, human rights? Could we see any new pathways to exactly continue these people-to-people contacts despite hardening of this authoritarian grip inside Russia?
Yeah, of course, this is the crucial question. I'm totally in favor for it. We are ourselves with our little institute, our Center for Liberal Democracy. We are involved. We are engaged in this kind of cooperation with democratic civil society in Russia and peoples-to-peoples contact. But it becomes every day more and more difficult because all of these foreign agent laws in Russia, we ourselves have been declared as an undesirable foreign organization, so we cannot act openly and cooperate with Russian partners anymore. One of the major goals of these kinds of restriction is to cut funding, Western funding for Russian civil society. You have more and more democratic activists, journalists, NGO people driven out of the country. Yeah, it's really an amazing brain drain now. And different from the former Soviet Union, now the Kremlin is allowing people to leave. Yeah, so they want to reduce the critical mass for potential opposition in the country. More and more thousands and thousands of people are leaving to the Baltics, to Poland, to Germany. Meanwhile, we have a Russian diaspora of maybe 40,000 people in Berlin alone. I don't. Maybe in Russia, in London, it's more the rich ones. So yes, we should then employ all channels and instruments for cultural exchange, city partnership, youth exchange programs, scholarships. Yeah, if we cannot longer cooperate with the kind of organized civil society, we should more reach out to individuals, especially to young people in Russia.
I think especially it's relevant when you have civil society being co-opted by the state, as we all know happens. Perhaps it's even more effective to go horizontal and to go to these really independent organizations, be they in exile or be they still in Russia. I'm sure they have still connections with their constituents in there. But John, I think in your book, in the concluding section, you talk about that Russia is on the track of alienation from Europe, the way modern Russia develops today. And the question is how Germany can accelerate Russia's return to Europe. So it's in the spirit of that, supporting Russia's return to its European path, which Russia quite well, is something that rationally deeply is comfortable with, I would imagine, rather than pivot to Asia or any other direction. What would be answer to your question that you so well put in your book?
Very good question. I think it's important for Germany, and not Germany alone, to present a vision of Europe for the Russia of the future, that Russia can fit into, that we have certain expectations of the way both we and Russia will behave in this Europe of the future. But this Europe of the future at the moment is not compatible with the way Russia is being governed. And it is ultimately a governance problem. Our governance systems are simply not incompatible. It's not quite a question of foreign policy interests of that, but just we have this fundamental incompatibility. And it's important for Germany in particular, I think, to take a lead on this by virtue of being the country that has achieved the remarkable transformation that it has since the days of 1945. And I think this is really recognized in Russia. that Germany can speak from experience of rebuilding a country. And to rebuild such a prosperous country, it's not just because they're good German engineers. It's because the political engineering was right and has allowed Germany to develop in this way. So there are massive lessons there for the future reformers and I hope there will be reformers of Russia who come to power to learn, particularly from the German experience. But I sensed in the 1990s in Russia that there wasn't really that much interest in learning from the experience of Germany, when in fact there should have been. But that's possibly more of an indication that Russia simply wasn't ready for the collapse of the Soviet Union and just the degree of tumultuous change, which for those of us, some of us living in Russia at the time, remember as being the most extraordinarily unpredictable time of great economic hardship and day-to-day problems, when it was more difficult to sort of philosophize about what sort of political model you should choose in ideal circumstances.
But again, these calm times for this kind of philosophizing, I guess, never happen. Whenever you have a systemic dramatic change like that, you have to reform, you have to repair your ship in stormy waters.
Sure, but that's why it's important now, when it doesn't look as though this Russian system is going to change or unravel anytime soon, for this sort of analysis and debate to take place.
Maybe just one additional thought that when we are advocating for, I would say, more consequential and policy towards Russia, and not to shy away from every conflict, but I'm not talking about military conflict, but political conflict. I think it's extremely important not to fall back into a kind of Cold War mood or mentality with respect to the Russian society. If we are feeding this kind of beleaguered country mentality, which the Kremlin propaganda every day is appealing to. Russia is encircled by enemies. We have to be strong to defend our interests, and so I think we must reach out as far as possible to Russian civil society and keep a sense of empathy with the country. If you're looking to the corona crisis, every day, according to the official numbers, 800 and more people are dying every day in Russia from COVID-19. And these probably are underestimated numbers. It's a human catastrophe in slow motion. And we should talk about that, and we should we should offer some assistance and reach out to the Russian people. It's a tragedy. So I think to keep this sense of empathy, and at the same time to become more assertive in political terms towards the regime, this is kind of balance we must find.
Keeping these messages very clear and trying to reach
It's
across.
not against Russia. We don't want to humiliate Russia. We don't want to bring them to their knees. This is the narrative which is reproduced all the time by the state media.
Please, here.
Thank you. Thank you for the brilliant speech. My name is Alena Hlivko. I'm a political analyst and a former politician in Ukraine. And I think my question will have to refer to the feelings that you've mentioned that Germany has towards Russia, which are based on guilt and fear, and of course, many natural connections between people. And that's where tolerance for all of the Russian actions stems from. So how high do you think that tolerance can reach, and how far can it go, according to perhaps, as John has mentioned, the tensions growing in Belarus, maybe Russia is getting ready to even annex Belarus, perhaps the escalation in the Black Sea, and and even the autocracy strengthening in Russia and something happening to Navalny or opposition being kicked out of the country. So how far do you think Germany is willing to tolerate, especially under the new government? Thank you.
And if I may again add, because it connects well to your question, Alona, from Ian Bond, from the Center of European Reform, because Ralph spoke about that Germans' guilt focused on Russia and not on Ukraine and Belarus, which suffered disproportionately and suffered much higher casualties as part of the Soviet Union in the Second World War. Ian is asking, is there anything that Ukraine in particular can do to raise awareness of the history of that period around the 80th anniversary of Babi Yar massacres, for example? So the big set of questions right here.
Yeah. First, I hope I was not misunderstood when I was talking about these special mix of the emotions, German, Russian emotions, that for me the consequence is not to turn a blind eye to every violation of international law and of human rights and of the sovereignty of Ukraine and other countries by the Kremlin. It's the other way around, that we should defend this, I would say, the normative order, the liberal normative order in Europe. We should be very clear then on that. It's about the playbook of cooperation. Yeah, we should be ready. We should then offer the Russian government different opportunities of cooperation, also on climate, energy, and all these. But the playbook has to be clear. Yeah, what are the rules then of the game? And strengthening empathy to the other Central Eastern European societies which had been victim of German atrocities and violence during the World War. It's very much a matter, of course, of information and education, and of developing these kind of relationships, yeah, for instance, historical commissions and youth exchange programs. And now maybe a positive sign, the President, Mr. Steinmeier, will visit Babin Jar for the 80th anniversary of the massacre, the mass murder there. Marie-Louise Beck will accompany him. We are working on another project in Odessa, remembering kind of the Odessa Babin Jar, where in one night maybe 25,000 Jews had been burned in Odessa. So this kind of grassroots history then work. And then just increase the consciousness on what has happened in this period of time. Because in the bloodlands, as Timothy Snyder has coined this young history. Yeah.
John?
Yeah, Aliona, you ask a very good question there. I think there are limits. And we saw those in 2014 with MH17. Angela Merkel received that news at her own birthday party and was apparently just shocked and furious that something like this could happen. And we saw a very, very firm reaction to that. Equally, Germany took a very firm position over the Navalny poisoning. And I don't think that Berlin could possibly have imagined when they got him on the plane that they were going to find elements of Novichok in his system. And it seems the Russian side was fairly sure it had washed them all out. But there was no hesitation in naming the substance and being very direct about it. And hence this furious reaction from Moscow. In the case of Belarus, we're just going to have to see how this is handled. And it's an extremely knotty problem for Europe and particularly for Berlin to deal with, because the sort of stronger action you take against Lukashenko, the more you appear to push him actually into the ready Putin embrace. So this is going to take a long time. What I'm really struck by sometimes in Germany is that in contrast to the depth of expertise on Russia, for example, there's much less on Ukraine. Much less.
Yeah.
Libmod's, doing great work there to try to address that. But Belarus, very few specialists on the region. Some, but it's a deficiency that needs to be addressed.
It's even worse that if you look to the public discourse and the common understanding of most Germans, Russia has been the victim of German aggression in Second World War, and the other neighboring countries have been collaborators. This is the framing which is very much also multiplied by the Kremlin media. Yeah, the Ukrainians, the Balts, they have been so. And it's really a lot of historical enlightenment and information to do to change this perception.
But I think also it's so important that countries like Ukraine, that was in the middle of those bloodlands, itself has an honest conversation within its own society about Holocaust. And I think one of the markers of European integration, actually, in addition to Green Deal, I would say, is the politics of memory and understanding of Holocaust that took place and having that honest conversation. I see the beginning elements of that with the Institute of National Memory and overall intellectual discourse that is taking place, but it's not yet as to where we would like to see. So we have just 5 minutes left, and I was thinking maybe we should especially you say a few principles that you would like to share with the future Chancellor of Germany. I think we're going to have to cut a short clip and send it to the future, the Chancellor. How do you engage with Russia not to repeat the blunders of the past? What would you like to share, Ralph?
First, I would say we should stop this kind of negative fixation on Russia, to make Russia the kind of decisive player in our Eastern policy, and as I quoted at the beginning, even to give them a kind of veto power in our policies towards Ukraine or the Georgia and the other former Soviet republics. The second is to develop a European Russia policy and not just continue this kind of special German-Russian relationship, including our Central Eastern European partners. And third, which is probably the most difficult exercise, to find a new equilibrium between selective cooperation and being firm on containment and deterrence towards Russia.
Actually, there's a new research paper written exactly under the title "How to Deter Russia" by Keir Giles on the Chatham House website. So if you are curious to know the answer to that question, feel free to go and check it. Maybe you can take it to Berlin with you, Ralph, see what people say about it. John?
I would say to the future German Chancellor, learn from Angela Merkel, hold Putin's gaze when you meet with him for the first time. Secondly, I would support everything Ralph has said, and I think it's important for Germany to de-emotionalize this issue of Russia. Just to think a little more calmly about it and speak to the other European allies, including the UK, by the way. I think UK is sadly missed at the table when the conversation about Russia takes place. I'd also like to see Germany doing much more for Ukraine.
Well, and here I have a perfect segue from your book, because I also have my favorite message to the future Chancellor, quoting you, where you say, Ukraine is key to resolving Europe's Russia problem. Mm-hmm. Contrary to the established thinking in Berlin and many EU capitals that Russia is key to resolving Europe's Ukraine problem, I think that is very well said. The underlying problem is Russia, not Ukraine. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a good summary of our discussion, and I really would like to thank all of you, first of all, coming in person to Chatham House. We hope this was a rewarding experience and you will come back in person again. And I would like to thank all those participants online. Thank you very much for sharing your insights, your thoughts, your feelings about Russia-Germany relationship, and let's hope that this relationship will be put on a better track for both sides, because I think that is so important for Europe. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ralph. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you so much.